The Apache girl lay twisted beneath the mesquite tree, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. Blood darkened the dust beneath her, soaking into the thirsty earth as if the desert itself was trying to drink her pain away. Her fingers clawed weakly at her side, where torn flesh burned like fire. "It's torn." "It hurts so much," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind brushing through the dry branches. Eli Crow stood a few steps away, frozen between instinct and memory. He hadn't planned to stop. He had been riding back to his cabin, mind empty, eyes on the horizon like always. People learned fast out here that stopping led to trouble, and trouble led to graves. For 3 years Eli had survived by minding his land and his silence, but the sound of pain cut deeper than any rule he had made for himself. He knelt slowly, careful not to startle her. She flinched anyway, fear flashing across her dark eyes before exhaustion dragged it down again. She was young, too young to be bleeding out alone in the desert. Her buckskin dress was torn, the wound ragged, not clean like a knife cut. An animal maybe, or men. Eli had seen both kinds of damage before, and neither left mercy behind. "Who did this?" he asked, though part of him didn't want the answer. Her lips trembled. "Soldiers came. They burned everything. My mother, my father." Her voice broke, and she turned her face into the dirt, shoulders shaking. "I ran." The words settled heavy in Eli's chest. He'd heard rumors, seen smoke on distant ridges, pretended it wasn't his concern. That lie tasted bitter now. He glanced toward the open plains, half expecting riders to appear at any second. Helping her would change everything. It would make him a target. It would drag the past back into his life with both hands. He rose halfway, taking a step toward his horse. The girl cried out again, sharp and desperate, and the sound stopped him cold. Memories flooded in. Another woman bleeding. Another time he'd walked away too late. Eli cursed under his breath, then slid his arms beneath the girl's frail body. She was lighter than he expected, like she was already fading. As he carried her toward his cabin, the sun dipped low, painting the sky red. Somewhere far off, a faint bugle echoed across the land. Eli's jaw tightened. He knew that sound, and he knew that by the time night fell, there would be no turning back. The Apache girl woke to the faint smell of smoke, and the warmth of a thin blanket draped over her shoulders. Her fever had broken, leaving her weak and trembling. Eli Crow sat nearby, sharpening a knife with deliberate, quiet motions. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her side still throbbed, every breath a reminder of how close she had come to death. She looked around the small cabin, noticing how bare it was, just a bed, a wooden table, and a few supplies scattered about. It was enough, and yet it felt impossibly fragile, in a world that had already taken everything from her. "My name is Nia," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "They burned my village, my family. They didn't leave anyone." Eli said nothing. He had heard whispers of Red Clay Pass, of soldiers moving through Apache lands with fire and fear. He had witnessed enough death to know that words were often meaningless in the face of such cruelty. Yet something in Nia's eyes, the raw fear and pain, stirred a part of him he had long buried. By noon, the distant sound of hooves grew louder, echoing off the hills. Eli froze, recognizing the disciplined rhythm of cavalry. Captain Harlan Whitmore dismounted with a group of soldiers, their polished boots gleaming even in the dust. "We're looking for a wounded Apache girl," Whitmore said, his tone casual but edged with menace. "Dangerous. Stabbed 2 men while escaping." Eli rose slowly, shotgun resting across his chest. "No one's been here," he said evenly, though his gaze flicked to the fresh bloodstain near the steps. Nia pressed her hand to her side, suppressing a cry. Her wound had torn open again, burning as if the air itself was conspiring against her. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You lying to me, rancher?" Eli's hand tightened around the shotgun. Inside, he heard the girl's shallow breaths, each one a fragile reminder of what was at stake. He made a choice he knew would brand him a target forever. He raised the shotgun, not at Whitmore, but into the sky. The report thundered across the valley, startling horses and sending the soldiers ducking instinctively. "I'm declaring this land cursed," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "You step past that fence, you don't walk back." Whitmore spat into the dust, fury and disbelief flashing across his face. Eli watched as the soldiers slowly backed away, their pride warring with survival instinct. That night, under a dark sky illuminated by stars, Eli set fire to his ranch. Flames licked the horizon, consuming fences, barns, and years of solitude. Nia watched silently, the pain in her side momentarily forgotten. She realized with a mixture of fear and awe that Eli had abandoned everything, his home, his livelihood, and the life he knew, to protect her. The canyon was silent, save for the faint rush of wind through the jagged rocks. Nia leaned against a boulder, her face pale and drawn, her body trembling from fever and exhaustion. Every step they had taken since leaving the burned ranch had been agony. Her side had reopened, the wound raw and burning, and she could feel each pulse of pain like fire coursing through her. "It's torn. It hurts so much," she whispered again, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. Eli Crow knelt beside her, his hand steady as he applied what little medicine he had left, murmuring words of reassurance she barely understood. He could feel her body quivering under his touch, fragile as dry autumn leaves, yet still burning with stubborn life. By morning, the distant rhythm of hooves broke the uneasy calm of the canyon. Eli peered over the edge of a ridge, spotting the glint of metal helmets and polished sabers. The cavalry had tracked them down, relentless in their pursuit. He studied the terrain, his mind racing for a plan. Dead Man's Gulch, narrow, treacherous, a place only the Apache knew. It was dangerous, but it was the only chance they had. He lifted Nia into his arms with careful precision, her small frame nearly weightless in his grasp. She rested against him, too weak to speak, her dark eyes wide with fear and pain. Eli led them into the canyon, moving swiftly but silently. The soldiers followed, unaware that they were walking into a trap carved by centuries of survival. At the heart of the gulch, Eli positioned himself above the pass, the rocks jagged and loose beneath his hands. With a series of precise movements, he triggered a landslide, sending boulders crashing down. Horses reared, men shouted, and chaos erupted in the narrow canyon. Dust and stone filled the air, the sound deafening. When the dust cleared, Eli stood atop the ridge, watching as the surviving soldiers scrambled from the gulch. Disoriented and beaten, Captain Whitmore, the last to escape, glared up at him, fury etched into every line of his face. "You chose an Apache over your own kind," he spat, his voice trembling. Eli's expression was calm, unwavering. "No, I chose what was right," he said simply, his eyes returning to Nia, who was weakly clutching his arm. One final shot echoed through the canyon, silencing Whitmore forever. Months later, travelers spoke in hushed tones of a lone white-haired man and a young Apache girl who wandered the canyon lands. They said he had once been a rancher, but now he was something else, protector, avenger, guardian. And Nia, healed and strong, became a healer among the cliffs, her eyes reflecting the memory of the man who had risked everything to save her life. In the wind that swept through the canyons, some swore they could hear her voice, and the story of mercy, pain, and sacrifice lived on. After the chaos of Dead Man's Gulch, the canyonlands seemed to hold its breath, as if the rocks themselves were watching the pair who now moved cautiously through its labyrinthine paths. Nia's side had healed enough for her to walk, but every step still sent sharp reminders of her ordeal. Eli Crow walked beside her, silent and watchful, scanning the horizon for any sign of the soldiers who had promised vengeance. Though weeks had passed since the landslide, the memory of Whitmore's fury lingered like a shadow, following them even into the quiet of the desert nights. Eli had become more than a protector. He was a man carrying the weight of consequences, knowing that every choice he had made had burned bridges and drawn eyes that would not forget. They found shelter in an abandoned cliff dwelling, hidden deep among the sandstone formations. Nia rested on a makeshift bed of blankets while Eli inspected the perimeter, his rifle slung loosely across his shoulder. Outside, the wind whistled through narrow canyons, carrying with it whispers of long-forgotten battles. It was here, in this quiet isolation, that Nia began to speak of her past, not the bloodshed she had witnessed, but the small joys of her family, the songs they sang around evening fires, the stories of her ancestors. Each word reminded Eli of a world he had long abandoned, a world without constant danger, where kindness had not been a weakness. As days turned into weeks, the two began to settle into a rhythm. Eli taught Nia how to move silently through the canyons, how to read the signs of the desert, and how to trust her instincts. She in turn taught him patience, showing that healing was more than tending wounds. It was listening, understanding, and sometimes letting go of the rage that burned in one's chest. At night, they would sit beneath the stars, sharing stories and planning, cautiously for a future that neither dared to fully imagine. But the peace was fragile. News of the canyon-dwelling Apache girl and her white-haired guardian began to spread, whispered by travelers and traders. Eli knew that sooner or later, someone would come, soldiers, bounty hunters, or worse. He tightened his grip on reality, realizing that protecting Nia meant preparing for battles yet to come, not just healing from the ones they had survived. Still, in the quiet moments, when the desert stretched endless and golden around them, they found solace. Nia's laughter returned, faint but genuine, mingling with the wind. Eli allowed himself to hope, if only a little, that the world might one day be kinder, that the canyonlands might become their sanctuary, and that a lone rancher who had given up everything could finally find a reason to stay alive, not just to survive, but to protect the life he had chosen to save.